Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining today's conversation on building a rich life portfolio. A few housekeeping items before we begin. All lines are on mute and will remain on mute for the duration of the discussion. However, we do have time for questions, so as we're going through, if you can submit those in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, we will try to get to as many as we can. And this session is being recorded. We will send out a replay to all registrants. So without further ado, let me hand it over to my colleague, Sally, to get us started.
Thank you. And good day to everyone. And thank you for joining the LHH ICEO practice in our executive conversation series as we welcome Bill Harmon, former Chief Client Officer at Voya Financial, for a discussion regarding building a rich life, strategies for a holistic retirement. I'm Sally Washlow, one of the practice leads in North America for the ICEO practice. A bit of reference, ICEO is a strategic partner to organizations and leaders offering executive career advisory services within a global boutique. Our team of advisors are accomplished business leaders and board directors who draw upon their deep experience to provide trusted advice and counsel, backed by a personalized team of industry and functional experts to support the unique needs of each client. Our service offerings include executive mentoring, onboarding, succession management, retirement, and career transitions. Our program today will run 45 minutes. As mentioned, we will have time for Q&A at the end and a wrap up. We do invite you to use the Q&A box that I will be monitoring, and we will take questions at the end. Also, at the end, we will have a quick poll, and we appreciate your feedback within the poll. So now let's dive in. As mentioned, today our amazing guest is Bill Harmon. Based upon Bill's blog, Are You Ready for 6 Saturdays and a Sunday? The retirement plan you need the most, but consider the least. And a recent article written based on a conversation with Bill called More Than Money. We will dive into why it is time to take a more holistic approach to retirement. Bill uniquely sits at the forefront of what many people think is planning for retirement, the financial piece, but found that there is so much more to have a fulfilling retirement. Bill dedicated his career to helping people retire as the Chief Client Officer at Voya Financial. Bill and his team service more than 50,000 benefit and retirement customers, helping them plan for, invest in, and protect their next phase of life. Today, we'll discuss with Bill beyond the financial piece of retirement and what companies and individuals can do to prepare themselves for the next phase. So, Bill, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Sally.
So I think a great place to start is, beyond your introduction, share a little bit more of your own story.
Yeah, I was in the financial services industry for 35 years. Just during that time, worked for 2 companies, and I was primarily focused on helping people be financially prepared to retire. But we really just said be prepared to retire. And kind of if you get to that moment and you've done everything you're supposed to do from a financial perspective, victory, when we got you there. And I really loved it. I felt there was a lot of fulfillment and there was a lot of purpose in helping people get to that magical day. And and prepare for the next chapter. But again, it was from that financial perspective. And so, um, I did this from a lot of different perspectives, from the sales perspective, from the sales management, and then got into executive roles. As you mentioned, my last one being chief client officer, where we had a team of about 700 client-facing individuals that would work with employers and employees to get to this magical moment. And then we had a corporate restructuring, and then suddenly I found myself in that position a little earlier than I expected. And so I kind of was reflecting and said, well, maybe I can use this as a bit of a sabbatical, if you will, and go through the experience that I've been helping people prepare for themselves. And I really found that there was so much more in this transition to your next chapter than just the financial piece. So as part of my what's next, I found myself digging deeper into this emotional component where I was trying to find books on this. And so if you go to Amazon and talk about finance or retirement preparation, you're going to find a ton of financial books. And then you have to really sift through, and I changed the search criteria and all of this. And I really couldn't find many on the emotional preparation for it. So I said, maybe I'll conduct a survey. I'll find these few books that I found, and one would lead to another and so on. But I'm going to see if there's some common themes that we could learn from, especially from the survey where I surveyed retirees, and ultimately see, is there a way that we can augment the current approach to retirement planning? So that was became a passion project of mine.
Thanks for sharing. And you mentioned research that you did along this journey, and obviously found a lot on the financial piece. But let's talk about the sheer numbers and the scale of what we're facing here, and this element of personal fulfillment. I know that you have your own personal experience and also some data to share in terms of, as I mentioned, the sheer numbers of what we'll be facing here, especially within the United States in terms of retirement.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if we're all fortunate enough, this will apply to every single one of us. And so,
Yeah.
but today it is a big number. There are 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 every day. This has been going on for some time. It'll go on until 2030. And in fact, I just was doing a little more research and found that we're actually at a bit of a peak. There's 12,000 baby boomers right now turning 65 every day, 84,000 a week. So this is kind of a big deal. There's a lot of people, and we say 65 because that's sort of been in our mind as your traditional retirement age, though some do it earlier and some do it. I was mentioning earlier, in order to really have a truly fulfilling retirement, you need to think about this more holistically. So again, I conducted the survey. Let's find out, is there something here? And so amongst many different questions, I asked, did you feel financially prepared to retire? I asked, did you feel emotionally prepared to retire? I also asked, now you're in retirement, do you feel personally fulfilled while you're in retirement? Because I would think that most of us would say, boy, it'd be great if I'm in this next chapter and I feel personally fulfilled.
Right.
What I found is when you correlate the financial question, being financially prepared, to emotional or to being personally fulfilled, only 68% of people that were financially prepared were personally fulfilled in retirement. So wait a second. For 35 years, I've been saying this is it. If I get you there financially, victory, and a third of the people said that they're not personally fulfilled. What's missing? Now, if I took the emotionally prepared to retire and asked if they were personally fulfilled, 88% of those that said I was emotionally prepared to retire, that they are personally fulfilled while in retirement. So I think that states that there's something here that we really need to dig deeper. I reflected on my own personal experience and said, well, what could cause that lack of personal fulfillment? And really what I found is that this is can be an abrupt change, and it can affect your self-perception. It can affect your identity. You used to be known as Mark Johnson of ABC Corporation, or used to be known as Jane Smith. senior vice president of products, and that was part of your identity. And then all of a sudden you go through a name change, and that is dramatic. In fact, you might even go through a wardrobe change because a lot of your
Yes.
clothes had the company logo, or your luggage tags or backpacks. I mean, much of what you have is your identity is related to the company you've worked for. And I think even more so, the company provides you, your work, your career provides you with this sort of built-in personal rudder, or a rudder on your personal ship. I mean, it steered you in the direction, it provided your crew, it gave you your task list of things that need to be accomplished. And when that rudder is gone, you need to build your own rudder. And not a lot of us have that muscle built to go build a rudder for our personal ship. And I think that's this transition that you'll get a lot of people saying, I think I'm just going to go back. I just feel lost. And I think it's because they don't have a rudder on their ship.
Yeah, I think that's great. Another point that you've shared is this sense of team, and I think that's part of your rudder, and you're leading the team, you're mentoring some of your team members, and I also the cadence of your day and the difference of maybe waking up in the morning and having that cup of coffee and there's 5 new emails that you need to address, and that suddenly goes away is another element of this transition that you don't realize. Sometimes, we feel like our email is a burden and it's this task list, but then when suddenly you're without it, you might feel a little empty.
There's a lot of people in the call right now that may say, oh, bring it on. I would love to not wake up to 100 emails. But there's a bit of I hate to say the word, but addiction, in the sense that we're always looking to see what just happened, how many emails. And that's a transition because, again, that's a big part of the rudder of your personal ship. That if all of a sudden I didn't have this direction that the emails were going to guide me through, or I was waiting for that response and that's going to guide me through, then you've got to really fill. If you almost created a pie chart of how you spent your time and energy, that's a big piece of the pie. And when you remove it, you've got to replace it, because your pie doesn't get smaller. But I think in the sense, some people say, well, I just have those other pieces. Hopefully they're big enough to fill your day. And that kind of leads into the next piece of, we've all worked with financial professionals to go help us create a diversified portfolio
Yeah,
for our investments.
right.
What about our life portfolio? My life portfolio was pretty filled with work. I had that big piece of my life portfolio pie was work, and that family, of course, and so on. But a lot of it, even just mentally, where my head was, even if I just had a kid's soccer game. So what you really have to start thinking about is building and diversifying and expanding, just like you do when you're creating your investment portfolio. You start adjusting your portfolio as you approach retirement to be a little bit more conservative. You need to adjust your life portfolio. Make sure that, think about your friend community. Most of my friends were through work. That's where I spent all my time and really enjoyed them. So you really need to think about expanding and diversifying your friend communities as one of your portfolio pieces. But I think you also need to think about your activities. My activities were
Right.
through work. I was pretty well-rounded, and I do a lot of volunteering and board work and the nonprofit. And my particular world is the people with special needs community. And
Yeah.
so, but even that wasn't enough. Like, I really needed to think about how I'm spending time on volunteering and passion projects and working out, athletics, pickleball, that sort of a thing. And that change doesn't start on the day you retire. It needs to really be just like your investment portfolio, 5 years out. And in fact, one thing during my research, I was really blown away by this, Sally, that only 25% of retirees volunteer. I thought,
Wow.
wow, there's so many charitable organizations that could use your expertise through board work or events or fundraising. I mean, this is what you did in many ways within your career. Now take it to an organization, an area that you're really passionate about, and help them.
Yeah, that's an interesting statistic. I wouldn't have thought 25%. And I think this aspect of, we always are looking at financial charts, rightly described, of pie charts and
Mhm.
how you have things allocated. And to start thinking early as you think about retirement, on just as you're looking at your financial portfolio, how should your life portfolio and activities change? Maybe start to get introduced to some volunteer organizations that knowing that in 5 years from now, maybe I'm going to lean in and give a little more to that organization. I think one other aspect that we talked about on this diversification, and you mentioned it, but I want to take a little bit of a deeper dive in it, your friends as well. Many of your friends are colleagues from work, but as you look around and maybe you're going into this retirement phase and they're not, who are the people that have the time to spend the time with you now? As they're maybe, still traveling and on the planes and doing all of that while you have adjusted to a different schedule now, what does your friend network look like as well?
And that could be lonely. Like, hey, let's play golf on Tuesday afternoon. It's like, I can't, I'm working. Hey, let's go
Right.
pick up and let's, two couples go out and travel. Let's go to Europe. Like, I can't do that. And so I think that becomes a bit lonely if you don't do some pre-work on that to say, even just to know people that have gone through this and then say, all right, that could be part of my new friend community.
Right, right. So thank you for sharing those aspects. You've also shared a lot about the research that you've done on the emotional side of retirement. And one book you mentioned would lead to another as you were researching. And that included a book regarding this concept, the Japanese concept of ikigai. Can you share more about what this concept is and why it caught your eye? And for everyone on today's webinar, we're going to have a link to this as well, that we're sharing with all of you as well. But would love to learn, more of what you found from this and why you found it so meaningful.
Well, I think a word name like ikigai will catch your attention.
Yeah.
So what is that? And I dug deeper, and it really is fascinating. And even the book gets into some of these blue zones where people live that have the highest propensity of centurions or super centurions. Like, well, what's their secret as to living longer? And there was a lot of this. They lived purposefully and they had a fulfilling life, and that helps you live longer. And so Ikigai is defined as that thing that gives you a sense of purpose, a reason for living. So when I read that definition, I thought, well, this is exactly what we're talking about. Let me dig deeper. And so what it is, kind of visually, is think of a four-circle Venn diagram. I'm getting back to corporate words here. We all dealt with Venn diagrams. So four-circle Venn diagram where each of the four circles, you have your what you love to do, what you're good at doing, what you can be paid to do, and what the world needs. And so today, all of us probably have two of those circles intersecting. Like, for instance, what you're good at doing and what you can be paid to do, well, that's your profession. Or you might have two circles like what you love to do and what the world needs, and that'd be like your mission if you're doing volunteer work. But when you get all four of those to connect, right in that middle, that's your ikigai. And so to find that, when all of a sudden now you say, well, what am I going to do? I have a little bit additional time. How do I do it to where it's really fulfilling? I think those are four great categories. Great, I'm just going to go do that. Well, it's a little harder than that. You need to really do a lot of introspection and questioning and so on. And these books all have like workbooks that are attached to them to even help you ask those questions, list them all out, and start to triangulate into what that center part is, which is your ikigai. And I thought, as we're thinking about this and preparing for retirement, that would probably be a really good exercise to think about. Help me find something that is, a reason for living, a sense of purpose, and then I'm really enjoying what I do day in and day out.
So that maybe you'll be in one of those blue zones and live to
The zone
100 and
105. Mm-hmm.
100 and beyond.
Yep.
Beyond. So I think that that turns to another area that we've discussed on how this phase can change the ecosystem on your household. And Ikigai talks about, having a long and happy life. And can you share what your research found in terms of this changing of the ecosystem of the household, especially as maybe one person is retiring, and this balance changes?
Oh, it is, and it's exactly as you said, Sal. I mean, when you think about, well, I'm going through this tremendous transition right now, you're not the only one going through this transition. I mean, this is can be potentially disruptive for the entire household ecosystem. And just like empty nesting is a shock to the ecosystem because suddenly the dynamic changed when your kids leave the house. Well, this is a big one too. So through my research, I I learned that during the pandemic, divorce rates increased from 14% to 34%. Now, pregnancy rates increased as well during the pandemic. So I guess wherever you were, it just kind of
Yes.
accentuated that. But pregnancy rates normalized and divorce rates did not normalize. They kind of stayed at that higher level. And in particular, divorce rates for baby boomers is over 43%.
Mm.
And that shocked me. And so, in fact, it's so big that it has a title, and it's called Gray Divorce. And so I really felt that even gave me more of a sense of like direction. Like we really need to talk about this because that would be horrible if you get to that point you retire and then these divorce rates are so high. So a really good book that I read was called Purposeful Retirement by Hiram Smith. And Hiram Smith actually is a person that started Franklin Planners that we all
Yeah,
had at one point. And
right.
he's really a great writer. He's very funny, but he's also very practical. And he talked about building a partnership plan as you prepare for retirement, not after. And he said you need to talk with your partner about um, travel plans and activities. What are we doing together? But what are we going to do that's separate? And household responsibilities should change. I mean, all of these things. So you talk about it as you're preparing for it. And in his book, he had this quote from Miriam Goodman. And she said, you wouldn't dream of retiring without a financial plan. But what so many couples fail to realize is that they also need an emotional playbook. So she
Mm.
wrote a book called Too Much Togetherness, Surviving Retirement as a Couple. Like, well, that's a great topic for exactly this because it is a giant component of preparing for retirement. Like, am I going to do the rest of this part of my life on my own, or are we going to continue to go through it? And so I that really got me curious. And then actually my sister told me this really great story. She's a couple years younger than me, but she and my brother-in-law do this kind of trial run of retirement together where they take short trips together, even like midweek when resorts are more quiet and they're less expensive. And they talk about these items, like what's it going to look like in the future together and each person's role and what's the environment going to be. And I really applaud my sister. I said, that's awesome that you do it like that. And so they just keep doing these little short trips here and there together. And that's going to give them this taste of what retirement will look like.
I think that's a great tip that your sister gave to you, because just as you mentioned this phase from, empty nesting to now together in retirement, when many people have been on vacation, it's during the busy time. That's, you're used to overpaying for
Mhm.
airfare and hotels, and to take these trips during times when it's not as crowded and maybe can enjoy more of the trips, and figure out what does this next phase look like in these trial runs is really a great tip for everyone to
Yeah,
try. And you
yeah,
might save a few dollars along the way
yeah. And
as
you
well.
probably have enough PTO piled up if
Yeah.
at that age. So yeah,
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing. Um, Another topic I wanted to discuss with you is that you were very fortunate, but so were we, fortunate to work alongside you and the ICEO team to prepare for this next chapter. Can you share how that helped you prepare for what is next?
Yes. And I haven't gone through this before, so I didn't know what to expect. And so I was really fortunate to have Ted Grant as my transition coach. And we really formed a really good friendship. And he provided great insight. He's got experience as being an executive in the financial services industry. And just these nuggets that he would provide of wisdom. And one was just building a portfolio of purposeful activities. So I'm so used to having that, back to my pie chart, being so dominated by one thing. But now you can really be thoughtful and intentional about building a kind of this portfolio that maybe part of it is paid. So I could take on some consulting roles and be paid for that. And then part of that pie is volunteering on a board. Part of it could be a paid corporate board. Part of it could be personal, like, just staying healthy and, athletics and working out, that sort of a thing. But build this in a much more balanced sort of a way that I probably have a little bit more control over. And so that was this new perspective. It's almost like he just, in the conversation, created a guide to my own ikigai. And so Ted was great. And he was really, really good about stimulating my thinking. Because again, I haven't gone through this, and Ted's worked with a lot of people in my role. And he so introduced me to new ideas and sharing possibilities. And he's a great guy. And I was very blessed in the sense I have Ted, and I had an executive coach that I kept a relationship. And she, Jill Berquist, really helped me think about things differently, introduced me to some books. So the combination of those two, boy, I would just say, be curious. Like, you got to ask a lot of questions, because it was emotional going through all the transition. And so to have those two voices were really fantastic. So again, I'm so happy with my relationship with Ted.
Yeah. I think it's wonderful, the relationship that you developed, and as well, thinking about this safe space to have these conversations, but also then boundaries that can be set in terms of, I've seen many people that they go into this next chapter and then they're excited about something, and all of a sudden they've lost a balance, and maybe they're volunteering as much as they put into work, and they don't have that element of time anymore to travel and do some of these other things. So I think having guideposts to lead you along these ways is really helpful.
Yep. It's funny, the title of the blogs, that 6 Saturdays and a Sunday, an old CEO that I used to work with would call it that. And
Yeah.
I thought that sounds perfect, 6 Saturdays and a Sunday. But what was interesting is that, or it actually could be horrible if I don't have like a really purposeful Saturday sort of a thing.
Right.
And even in my survey, I asked what everyone's favorite day of the week was. And so while you're working, your favorite day of the week was, and it came up, assuming a Monday to Friday kind of job, it was like Friday or Saturday. But when you're retired, your favorite day is Monday. And I thought, oh my gosh, Monday's a swear word, right? Really? And I
Right.
think there's something, because if they're really finding that out, I'm in the world, everyone else is working, the market's open, but I'm enjoying my new life portfolio. And all of that, I think, takes some transition and intentionality, being intentional when you go
Right.
through it.
Right. So I think that goes nicely with the next part of our conversation, being intentional. Um, working within the realm of ICEO, or even thinking ahead. Can you share your thoughts on the role of companies and considerations needed to think about helping executives prepare for these non-financial aspects of retirement?
Yeah. We used to talk about on the employer side, there's a huge, we just talked about it, 12,000 people turning 65 every day. And if that's a trigger point for retirement, if that's happening, then there's a huge, and they've even got this term for it, but a brain drain going on. You're losing all of this knowledge and context and experience going out the door. And I used to even say that when I was helping people financially prepare to retire, we would have all these accumulation plan strategies, and you get to this point and we'd have a nice spend down strategy so it delicately comes out and you don't run out of money, and we can do that through products or education, all that. But you don't take all the money out. When you leave, you take all the knowledge out, and it is a lump sum distribution. And so that's just not balanced. We really need to think of a way to do that. And meanwhile, you're replacing that knowledge and experience with some of the new group that's coming into the work world. And college graduates now spend half of their college time virtually. So there really is a gap from working together, doing project planning together, and even in a virtual environment, but it's a whole new world. And so that's just a big gap. And so, I just wonder if there's a better way to help this group that's getting ready to retire, but say, let's talk about your plan. Maybe instead of you doing the 5-day, 10-hour a day type of thing, what if you came in and help mentor our next group, or even those that are just being hired, and do it at your time frame? Maybe it's 2 days a week, but we could use that knowledge and experience. I also think what that could do is then give that group that's thinking about retirement a plan to retire.
Right.
Because I also did a lot of research, and the reason people
Yeah.
don't retire is they don't know what they're going to do in retirement. So by default, I'm just not going to retire. Well, that
Right.
actually creates quite a disruption to the ecosystem inside of the whole natural ecosystem at work, because if they're not retiring, then that next group of managers isn't moving up, and maybe they end up being disenchanted and they go to another place that has better upward mobility. And you don't want that, because now you've got a giant talent gap. So if employers could think about, I'm going to help you really have this holistic approach in planning for retirement. And one of them is, I'm going to help you with that life portfolio, that maybe rather than being dominated by this, what if it just was a quarter? You needed 2 days a week, and I need you to do some mentoring and sharing your experience and all that with that next level, but even importantly, that group coming in. I
Yeah,
think that would be great.
as I reflect upon what you're saying, this wind down, think about as you're joining an organization, for many of us way back when, and you're an intern and you're starting and you're maybe in 3 days a week and 4 days a week. You're transitioning up in your career, and then it's this transitioning out as well, and thinking of the whole life cycle. And I was monitoring our Q&A, and somebody shared with us that in Canada, there are 800 Canadians retiring each day. So clearly it's a global issue. And so thank you for sharing some of the other, stats that are relevant within other countries as well. So I think as well, based upon your research, your learnings to date, embarking on your own transition, how might you view being ready for retirement in the future, and what would you like see changed?
What's interesting? If you think about your life, you went to elementary school and it sort of prepared you for the dreaded middle school, but middle school prepared you for high school. And then high school kind of prepared you for college. And then when you were in college, you had internships or job, but it was really in the developing you to be prepared for that next one, which is work. And then you go through all of that, and maybe even in work, it's preparing you for the next role and so on. The preparation part just stops, it comes to a screeching halt for your next phase.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, thank you. You did everything for us, and I'm sure you got everything else figured out. I helped you financially. We had a nice, generous match and profit sharing and all of that. But it wasn't just the full rounded preparation for that next phase. So I really do think that there could be better guides, because I think, again, I was forced into this thinking, and then I did all the research and I was curious, and it was really hard to find. It'd be nice if it was easier, the resources, because it's a very personal thing. As I was doing this writing, I didn't want to pretend like, what everyone should do? Everyone should do the following things and that'll be perfect. It's not. Instead, it's a lot of categorizing and then asking questions so that each individual can do their own reflection, and then start preparing for their own view of what the next chapter will look like. And so the question would be, who could deliver that? If we created the material, who would deliver it? And it could either come from the employer, which I think would be a really nice thing, or it could come maybe from financial advisors who want to expand on their guidance and preparation, not just from the financial piece, but then you're great, you're set financially, but what are you going to do? Here are some topics to consider in different categories and ask all of that. And that really does have, I mean, it has to be done 5 and 10 years before retirement, not the day of. And
Right.
I think the dramatic majority, the day of, or traveled for a month and then I came back and said, right, now what? Because our industry, the financial services industry, has all those pictures of the silver-haired guy walking along the beach. They're all wearing their linens, and that's what retirement looks like. And that is dreamy,
Right.
maybe for a month or two or whatever it might be. But then what? Like, you need to find your next thing that's going to provide that fulfillment and sense of purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you phrase it of, that as we're going through, middle school, high school, preparing for college, maybe post, graduate work as well for this career. And so there's so many resources and time to prepare for it. And then it's like, have the retirement party, the balloons pop, and now what?
Mhm.
So, this is terrific. We do have a few minutes left, and I want to turn to Q&A from our audience. And so thank you, audience, for submitting some questions. And I'll share one of them. Great session. Wish I had this 5 years ago. Given what you would recommend for someone who is within 1 year of retiring and has not prepared?
Well, that's 365 days. So that's better than most. And the fact that you're curious and asking those questions, even if you started just with the path that I did, if you got that purposeful retirement as a starting book, because that's what led me to a lot of other books, and it has some guides, and I have just a list of books that are stacked right next to me here. But I would do that because that was a really good framing of thinking in different categories. And that could be a really good start. It's a quick read, and it's entertaining. I would start with that.
Thanks. I have another one. This, I think, relates to earlier in our conversation. So we'll go back to when we were talking about pie charts. If you were to create a pie chart on how a retiree should use his or her time, what percentages would that look like to ensure both mental and physical health, social life, travel, volunteer? Do you have a magic formula, or does it depend on personal interest?
I think it really does depend on personal interest. I think that there's a lot of people that have passion projects. They're a musician, or they work on cars or whatever. And I think that would sort of say, gosh, if I had more time, I would do this. I wrote a list of things, like just while I was in my career, of things that I would do. I wanted to learn Italian, and I wanted to take cooking lessons, and I wanted to write a children's book. I mean, all of these things. And yet all of a sudden I found like this new passion project with this to help people. And so I think each person would need to reflect and say, what is important to me? I did find, like, you know what? I have a lot more time to work out. Like, I should be fit as a fiddle. Why don't I do that?
Yeah.
And so, but other people may find other things to be stimulating. And I think it's really important to do that. Just really reflect, write it all down. And there's books that can help you. Someone in the comments wrote, and I did read this, From Strength to Strength by Arthur Brooks. That's a really good book, and it really
Yeah.
kind of shocks you right in the very beginning. There was another great book called What's Next? And that one was really good to help you sort your thinking. And it applies to losing a loved one, transitioning out of work. I mean, there's a lot of things that just say, what am I going to do next? I found that fascinating.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing. Somebody had put that book in chat too. So looks like a lot of us are aligned here. I think this is an interesting question. because you've gone through it as, you know, a longtime employee of a company, granted maybe a little earlier than you thought, but advice on how to support retirees and have ongoing conversations throughout retirement, or as needs change through the different stages. So is there a role here for companies? And I would also add to that, how should companies start these conversations, based on, you know, your own experience?
You know, it'd be wonderful if they just even, you know, the question that came up and said, well, I'm only a year out. What do I start thinking about? But if they actually had, you know, we're having great dialogue right now in the Q&A with different books. If they
Yeah,
would recommend, if there was a way to say, while you go into retirement, there are things you should consider from beyond the financial component. Here's some resources, or even if they had a counselor, like someone just to say, these are, let's just talk about different things, because it can't be a guide. I really, for a while, just the way my brain works, said, oh, there's a formula. We just put it, you know, it's a math formula. Let's just put this formula together. And it is not, because it's different for everybody. But there are categories that need to be discussed. There's another component that you referenced, and it's almost like in my world, we would talk about glide paths, which is what your target date funds use to invest more in equity versus fixed income, and then you get more conservative. There's a glide path in life. And when you retire, you're going to have all the things you want to do. You want to do more reading, you want to do language, you want to do all these things. I want to travel. You might want to think about that first part of your life. Like, how many years in retirement will I be really healthy? And how many years in my retirement will my health maybe start to fail?
yeah,
And think about your activities from that perspective. While I'm healthy, I think that is the time I'm going to be very active or travel or do all those things. I'm going to front load a lot of those items, and then maybe save some of those other things and start increasing the, you know, time I spend on the reading, the book clubs, the whatever it is that won't necessarily take as much maybe physical energy, because it's just a, you know, point in life. There, I saw a stat at a conference that talked about retirement and said, but if the average age is, call it 85, so from 65 to 85, how many of those 20 years are you going to be physically healthy?
yeah.
And it's different for men and women. Life expectancy is different, but it's different for every person. And I think you need to ask yourself that question too, and then plan your activities accordingly.
Well, thank you. This has been great advice for us, and we've had great audience participation as well. I do want to keep us on time today. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we will be sharing this recording with everyone who joined again, and as well, we will also have key takeaways. So within that, we'll share some of the books that have been referenced as well. So I would like to thank everyone for being here today, and we greatly appreciate the insight that you've shared with us today, Bill. I think that each of us have some key takeaways from your journey, and I hope everyone has learned something from our session. We would be greatly appreciated if everyone would take a minute to respond to our quick poll that we'll have here at the end, and we hope everyone has a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
So thank you all.